we can indeed still discuss the main policy issues of the day. And I'm delighted that we've been able to have a very strong lineup of speakers for you today to talk about one of the most important policy initiatives that we've seen launched by the European Commission this year. Indeed, I'm talking about the industrial strategy, and today's meeting is indeed talking about industrial strategies for climate leadership. The COVID-19 pandemic represents a challenge for Europe, but also represents an opportunity as to how we recover from it and how we also build European industries that are fit for the future and can deliver a strong and sustainable future for European workers and European industry. As you've probably seen on the lineup, we're very lucky that we have Mark Nicholas, who I hope will be joining us later on today. MEP Christoph Grudler, who's indeed leading the own initiative report for the Renew Europe group on industrial strategy in the European Parliament. We'll have Marcus Newborough, who is a representative of ITM Power, who are building the largest electrolyzer factory in the world, and indeed in Europe. And we'll be finishing off with Marco Weinecker, who is leading the work for sustainability for Wärtsilä, one of the world's largest engine producers here in Europe. And so I think we have a good array of different views to hear from about what industrial strategy should bring in terms of climate leadership. And I think we have a slight change to the order of presentations because I think that Mark Nicholas is having a slight technical problem of joining us. Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong, or Kathleen, do direct me otherwise. But we are delighted that Mr. Grudler was able to join us earlier. And indeed, thank you, Christoph, and good morning. We'll be very happy to hear your views on the Industrial Strategy Own Initiative report that your committee, the Industry ITRI Committee, is leading, and indeed what you imagine should happen for European industry in the post-COVID-19 era. Good morning, MEP Grudler. Thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Good morning, James. Thank you very much for Eurogas for this organization. The economic and health shock we have experienced today with the coronavirus pandemic show us how valuable is our industry, but it shows once again how dependent European industry is in the supply chain on critical raw materials. As you know, on 10 March this year, the Commission published its industrial strategy for greener, digital Europe that is globally competitive. This strategy did not see the economic shock that awaited us coming. The Commission's presentation of its strategy to Parliament's plenary session was cancelled, and the press conference aroused little interest from the media. Like many of my colleagues, and as shadow rapporteur for industrial strategy for Renew, I welcome the measures approved. We need a more competitive, sustainable and digital Europe. In this changing world, with the challenges of digital and environmental transition, our industry must adapt and modernize if it is to stay ahead of the game. The creation of European industrial ecosystems, bringing together key players, academic and research institutes, suppliers, SMEs, and large companies is an excellent initiative. Also excellent, the launch of new industrial alliances, which have produced good results in the fields of batteries, plastics, and microelectronics. A new European Alliance for Clean Hydrogen will be launched. Alliance covering low carbon industries, industrial clouds, platforms, and raw materials should follow as soon as they are ready. In addition to the 1,700 billion already mobilized by the European Union to address the crisis, The European Parliament approved last week the recovery bonds with the support of German and Nordic liberals. Recovery bonds do not mutualize past debts guaranteed by the European Union budget. They are joint obligations to finance with new resources a major joint economic and social investment plan with at least 500 billion new resources. We hope that the European Council will meet on 23 April, will follow the solution proposed by Parliament. We all have been affected by the pandemic, some member states more than others, but we must rebuild together, face the next challenges ahead us together and stronger, and use this funding for an ambitious post-COVID industrial recovery plan. This is an opportunity for Europe that should not be missed. This Friday, 2024, we have an exchange with Commissioner Thierry Breton in the ITRE committee, the committee where I am involved when I am vice coordinator, and we will be able to discuss this industrial recovery plan. Many of us support the idea of a green recovery. The post-COVID industrial recovery plan must support a carbon neutral industry by 2050. But we also need measures to save our industries, particularly those in strategic sectors such as aviation, energy, aluminium, space, and the automotive sector, by giving them access to European funds, guarantees on credit facilities, and by supporting European innovation. But in the face of the coronavirus shock, the greatest challenge facing Europe in peacetime, we are more convinced than ever that we need ambitious medium-term reforms to guarantee real European sovereignty. We need a more sovereign and strategic Europe. Everyone now understands, the Commission included, that we need to be more self-sufficient. We need funding for key sectors and technologies like energy, digital, defense, space, and strategic infrastructure. As shadow rapporteur for Renew and the report on industrial strategy, I would like Parliament to take a clear position in favor of the relocation of industrial production in strategic sectors, the revision of competition rules, a carbon adjustment mechanism at the border, which could make the rules of the game more equal between European industry and foreign industries, the revision of anti-dumping rules, and a European preference in public procurement. The European industrial strategy and now the post-COVID industrial recovery plan should be the best instrument to create this real European sovereignty. Thank you for listening, and thank you for Eurogas.
No, thank you very much, MEP Grudler. I think you made some really interesting points. We have about 156, 155 people on the line, and there is a question box. And I would encourage you to drop questions into it. If you go onto the right-hand side, there's a drop-down in the toolbar and it says questions. So please drop your questions into that, and I'll be happy to ask them. Mr. Grudler, do you have a couple of minutes just to follow up?
I think I will have a couple of minutes, but sometimes it's difficult for me to understand all English questions. I try to do my best, but I'm sure you will translate it and make it easier for me.
Your English is perfect. You have nothing to worry about. Much better than my French, I will confess.
You can try French if you want.
Yes, I'll spare myself the embarrassment. I think you touched on a lot of very interesting points, and you talked about strategic sectors. The Clean Hydrogen Alliance, for example, has been identified by Commissioner Breton. When you are looking at the European Parliament at things like those strategic sectors, do you also see the growing role of hydrogen and the possibilities for Europe as Europe's leadership and to become champions in the development of hydrogen?
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about hydrogen in European Parliament, in European institutions. We know that hydrogen is the easiest way to find new important production of green production. Of course, green hydrogen, because we have a different kind of hydrogen. But hydrogen for stocking wind energy, solar energy, it's very important. And now with the new alliance, hydrogen clean hydrogen alliance, a lot of operators, a lot of projects are now in the Commission, and I think we will have a very nice alliance with a lot of countries involved in this production. You know that alliance needs to have a lot of countries. It's not only one country, it's not two countries, not three, but more. And in the past, it was very difficult to talk about champion, to talk about alliances, because some countries say it's only for Germany, France, Italy, and now the project involves a lot of SMEs, a lot of small startup, and it means that 27 countries should be involved in alliances, and it's good for Parliament because we can vote in favor of, because everybody has an interest in this alliance.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that was a good clear answer, and indeed we do have a strong interest in it. We as Eurogas have pushed very hard for the clean hydrogen, also to take into account CCS, hydrogen produced from natural gas. And that leads me on to a question that we've received from the audience. Mateusz Stankiewicz-Sinker, who I think works at FTI, has asked, I would like to ask you particularly, what do you see as the role of gas in the future of Europe? And would this be somehow reflected in the ITRI report?
Gas is very important because we have a lot of pollution, and it's very easy to have good pipelines in all Europe. But it depends what we can put inside the pipeline. The best for the Green Deal for 2050 is, of course, to have a mixed gas in the pipeline. We have biogas, we have hydrogen, we have natural gas, and we can have it together. For example, in a pipeline, we can now studies shows that we can have 20% of hydrogen in a normal gas natural pipeline, and biogas can be put inside. And I think it's for the future it will be very important, because only wind, only solar energy, it's not the most part of European energy consumption. It's a small part. It's 8% for wind, 4% for solar. But with gas, with clean gas, I can say, it's easier for the future, and especially hydrogen.
Right. So in a way, you kind of see an evolution in gas, also using gas for the time being, but then an evolution into more hydrogen for the future. I've had a number of questions actually though about the industrial strategy in itself and the relationship with China, and people asking as well about do you see anti-dumping measures as part of the industrial strategy? How would you, I mean, Renew Europe is a sort of central, sort of liberal thinking. Do you see anti-dumping and a more difficult relationship with China in the result of the industrial strategy? How do you see it? Would we be seeing, like we saw in the past, anti-dumping on solar, or is that not part of your view of industrial strategy?
Commissioner Breton said that we have to be, it's finished with naive Europe. And the most important with China or other foreign countries is to have reciprocity. I just want to give you an example in industrial race strategy. With now it's absolutely impossible to go to China and to send trains. Impossible. You have to make transfer the technology. I don't know if you can translate it, but the China's market is closed for our trains. But China comes to Europe and buy a German train company, no problem. Goes to Bulgaria and put trains in this country, no problem. It's not fair competition. We need fair competition. We need reciprocity. If we can't go to China for trains, China can go to the European Union for trains too. It's very important for us to be not to be too naive. And well, sometimes we have discussion with our liberal friends because it's not only open market and everything works or didn't work. Because if it is it will be the end of Europe. ASEAN will be at the head, and we have to be very attentive to what happens. And I think reciprocity is the best way to make a good business.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's how you have to deal with all your partners to try and be on a level playing field on the same footing. And I think a lot of people on the call can probably agree with that, Mr. Grudler. I have one more question, if you don't mind, and then I know you have to rush. But it was just a number of people have asked, what kinds of demand-side instruments can you imagine being deployed to increase the amount of hydrogen, whether that's green or blue? And would you see, is there enough renewable electricity deployed? Do we have the right sort of technology to bring CCS from? Or do we need to intervene in the market and introduce things like targets or quotas, as some of the questions are asking? So do you think there's a need to intervene in the gas market to put some sort of incentive in place to drive hydrogen development in Europe?
Okay, I'm sorry, it was cut when you speak, but I think you're talking about storage. What are you talking about?
About do we need to have targets for the development of hydrogen?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think when Alliance will be launched, it will be very important for each country to have people who say, "Oh, okay, my country, I can do it with hydrogen." It's the first one. The second is to put. We have a very important fund whose name is Horizon Europe, with a lot of research and development, and maybe it will be 100 billion. And I'm sure that we have to find best technologies in hydrogen for the storage, for example, for the production, because for example, just a couple of seconds. For example, when you have wind energy, if you put it into electricity fields, it's very efficient. If you store it in hydrogen batteries, for example, and you make electricity after, it's absolutely horrible. You have only 20% of efficiency. Then I think we can make a lot of things in research and development. We can help local cities and to use hydrogen for mobility, for heating. There is a lot of sectors where you can use hydrogen. For example, now we have it in trains, in buses, for the transport. We have central heating with hydrogen in some buildings. I think all of this experimentation should be more developed. The most difficult is for aviation, for aeronautics, because we know that hydrogen in a plane, it's not so easy, because the storage of hydrogen needs a lot of places. Fuel and hydrocarbon are smallest in a plane. But we'll research and development. I think it will be the best way to put hydrogen ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Grüler. Thank you, MEP Grüler. Very, very interesting points. I think you've given us all a lot of room for thinking, but very happy to see you taking a progressive view about the role of hydrogen, about the role of gas for the future. And I think that we can say thank you very much. I think you maybe are going to have to drop off the call, but I really appreciate you also taking the time to answer questions. We literally had so many, we could have probably stayed on for the whole morning. But I think we will now. I think Mark Nicholas has now been able to dial in. We will go to his presentation, and then Marcus Newborough, who is also online, and Marco Weinecker, we will come to you in a minute. But Mr. Grüler, thank you very much for your contribution this morning. It's been a real pleasure on behalf of Eurogas. Thank you for staying, answering the questions. I'm sorry to those of you whose questions we didn't have a chance to cover, but maybe we can ask some of them to Mark. So, Mr. Grüler, thank you very much and have a really good day.
Thank you, James. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Mr. Nicholas, Mark, are you on the line? Can you hear us? Mark? I can hear something. I can hear something, but I can't hear Mark. I have no. I understood he's on the line, but isn't available. Apparently, can't hear us, or really can hear us apparently, but I can't hear him. No. Okay, then I think we may as well, in such a situation, move on to Marcus. And I apologize for the technical difficulties we're having with bringing Mark Nicholas on. So I'm sure we'd all like to see his presentation. But in the interest of time, we still have 45 minutes. I think I will move to Marcus. Good morning, Marcus, and I hope you're doing well, enjoying yourself. And I'm very, very happy to hear all about, well, ITM Power. I had the pleasure of coming to visit you last year and seeing the existing factory you have, but you are now in the process of building the world's largest factory for PEM electrolyzers, so a European champion in your own right. And I think everybody on the line would be very interested to hear how you think industrial strategy can help you and help other European companies to become climate champions, clean technology champions. So Marcus, good morning and welcome.
Okay, good morning, James. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I think, as you just said, you had a very good introduction to where ITM is right now. We make PEM electrolyzers and we're expanding into a new factory which will produce 1 gigawatt per annum, which is a very large amount of electrolysis. We firmly believe in the renewable hydrogen approach, or green hydrogen as some call it. And I think we need to dwell on why we do what we do. So you, James, used the phrase which the press is using right now, earlier on in the intro, the post-COVID-19 era. And I think we all believe in that. We will get there. It's a difficult time right now, and we have faith we will come through this. However, I think one thing is really important to contrast that with is the whole issue of climate change. Climate change isn't reversible. There isn't a post-climate change era. It's actually something you need to deal with to avoid quite catastrophic consequences. And the scientific community has been warning of this for 30 years or more. And I think we've all seen the documentaries and read the articles, etc. And we can all imagine the consequences of continued emissions of CO2 and methane into the atmosphere. So, without dwelling on all the issues that involves and the level of difficulty it involves for the human population in the future, I think there's basically a strong desire to switch to a zero emissions future. It's not a wish to get there gradually. It's now becoming a desire to switch, to kind of get hold of the rudder of the ship and pointing at zero emission solutions. So by that, that implicitly means we need zero emissions electricity and we need zero emissions fuel. One of the really interesting things when you look at energy use across the EU is you find about 6 times as much energy is used in the form of molecular energy, gaseous, liquid or solid fuel, as electricity. And electricity has held much of the debate, much of the focus the last 20 years, and is gradually getting more renewable. But we really badly need to move to a zero emissions fuel. So that provides the context really for why we do what we do in believing in electrolysis for splitting water into hydrogen, because green hydrogen becomes that fuel. Fortuitously, we're very lucky in Europe. We have very large resources of renewables to exploit. If you look at the North Sea countries and the accessible offshore wind energy, you find some very large numbers. If you look to the south, you look to Morocco, for example, you find very large numbers of renewable energy source. Indeed, it's worth mentioning Hydrogen Europe published a very useful report about a week ago on the 80 gigawatt target for electrolysis by 2030, which is a very large amount of electrolysis. Half of that will be inside Europe, half of it will be in the Ukraine and North Africa. So there is plenty of renewable energy out there. What people don't realize is you cannot possibly cram that all into the power grid. It's not feasible. The variability of it does not match the variability of demand. Therefore, we have to manage that renewable energy and provide it a means of storing it. Gas, gaseous energy provides that storability. Therefore, the ability to store renewable energy is the domain of gas. It is the domain of gaseous energy. And as I said just now, we use 6 times as much molecular energy as we do electrical energy. So the potential market for hydrogen is 6 times as big, if you will, on average, than the electricity market. So we're not only providing green fuel for various applications, whether it be mobility, fuel cell vehicles, decarbonizing large industrial processes, or facilitating decarbonization of the gas grid. We're also helping solve a problem for the electricity system, in as much as it too needs to get to its fully renewable status by 2050. And so there's a synergy there. And the EC has picked up on this in recent years and used the phrase sectoral integration or sector coupling to illustrate that synergy and accessing that synergy. When you solve someone else's problems, they usually pay you for doing it. So what you're finding is the prospect of grid services in the electricity sector becoming a bigger issue, a more valuable possibility, and electrolyzers that can provide flexibility to help manage power grids whilst outputting hydrogen for mobility or industry or gas grid applications are in a very good position for providing that win-win situation. And these are the reasons really why we've made the step to develop this large factory that we're building in Sheffield, which will open later this year. We'll have a max capacity of 1 gigawatt per annum of electrolysis from that factory, and we'll be looking to exploit it in a variety of markets that are starting to emerge because they value the zero emissions aspect of using hydrogen rather than using the conventional fuels. All we can say to the EC really and to governments is you need to step quickly now. This is urgent that you transition quickly to zero emission solutions. Hydrogen plus electricity is that collective, that combination which gives you that zero emissions result. And I think if you ask the average guy on the street, especially after there's been some severe weather effect, as has happened recently in the UK in February, with many thousands of homes getting flooded, he will say to you, yes, please, I would like to step across to zero emissions as soon as you can. Please put the policy alongside the technology and make it happen. Make it happen inside 30 years. So thanks. I think that's what I wanted to say, James.
No, that's great, Marcus, and I quite like the alluded analogy there that the gas sector could somehow be the shrink for the electricity sector, solving the problems and getting paid for doing it. I think that we have a number of questions, needless to say, that have come through. People are asking questions like, do you think at some point that hydrogen and renewable hydrogen, in your case, will become cheaper than natural gas at some point in the future? Is that something that you envisage, Marcus?
I think there's a continuous down curve for the cost of renewable electricity and the cost of electrolyzers, and you put those two things together, green hydrogen becomes cheaper and cheaper. Electrolyzers are produced in such small quantities today that the upscaling of them and the increased volume production of them leads to large changes in their capital cost. If you study the renewable electricity trends, especially, for example, offshore wind, you see falling prices, and you also see this difficulty of not being able to sell all that you generate. So the electrolyzers mop up or provide a second market for the renewable power providers. So I think it's just a continuous progression towards cheaper and cheaper costs. Whether you get to the price of natural gas eventually, I don't know. I don't actually think that's too relevant. I think the important thing is to have a storable fuel that you can access in small or large quantities when you need to. That's what gaseous energy does for you. If you want to fly a plane or drive a car, you need to put some fuel in it and store it. Electricity is not useful. You need to store fuel, and I think once people get the fuel aspect alongside the electricity aspect, we'll all make rapid progress to lower cost.
That's that's a very interesting viewpoint. And indeed, I think that people are they're interested to see how we think that the gas sector will evolve in the coming 30 years as we play our role towards climate neutrality that you also yourself alluded to. One question we have had that's coming from Tim Kehler from Zukunft Gas in Germany is he said that basically the European Union sort of began as a coal and steel community in the 50s. Do you think that hydrogen could play a role to strengthen the European Union now in a relative time of crisis in many ways? At the COVID pandemic, there's been Brexit in the last few years. Do you think that hydrogen can play a role politically to bring Europe together, developing organizations such as yours as champions?
Well, when you look at the requisite pieces of the jigsaw, we have large amounts of renewable energy nearby. We have leading electrolyzer companies in Europe. We have an extensive gas network, and you cannot transfer large amounts of renewable energy without a gas grid. It's not feasible or plausible to do it with the electricity grid. If you really want to move energy around, you've got to have it in the form of a pipeline grid. We have one very large market. It's hungry for energy. We don't need to import things from Australia. Australia's got a lot of good publicity in recent years because it has vast resource, but it's a long, long way from anywhere. If you look at the North Sea, the Norwegian Sea, the Baltic, the sea around the end of the Mediterranean and the Morocco area, there's vast amounts of energy there that can be tapped. And the really good thing is, when you invest in it, you know it's renewable. It's able to be renewed. It's not going to be the exercise of extracting oil and gas out of one area 50 or 75 years later, realizing you've used it all up and you need to go somewhere else. So what we're investing in is a long-term solution for capturing and conveying renewable energy to all corners of Europe. So I think it adds up for all the stakeholders involved in that exercise.
But I think despite what you say about Australia, you are in favour, though, as I understood from the early parts, of bringing hydrogen in. As you said, the 40+40 initiative is talking about bringing hydrogen from Ukraine and also North Africa. So you do take in Eurogas, we take a global view as well. We'd still have a global gas market. We have LNG moving around the world today, and Marco will talk a bit about that in a minute. But we also would see that in the future, you could still have that with hydrogen. You see it like that as well, Marcus, or you see it more indigenous?
I think Europe can do a lot by taking an indigenous approach initially. I think electrolyzer manufacturer, we're quite happy to sell electrolyzers anywhere in the world. Obviously, there's a lot of bad press for LNG, for example, in terms of the additional carbon footprint of lugging it halfway around the planet. So there's a certain strength in terms of indigenous energy security from starting from that position, connecting to other sources by pipeline, which are particularly cheap, will help us make even more of that hydrogen in the future. But there's a terrible danger of hesitation and not doing things. And I can remember it's about 8 years since we started advocating hydrogen admixtures in gas networks and implementing the first power to gas systems that we installed in Germany. And I'm quite amazed it's 8 years has gone by and we're still trying to move forward in this area. It's taking society a long time to switch, whereas actually the need is very urgent. So I think we need to take the responsibility, and the EC needs to start making things happen inside Europe and then connecting to other sources outside of Europe. And manufacturers will sell their technology to whoever wants it at the end of the day.
Just give you one more question. So Marco, on notice, I'll be coming to you in about 2 minutes. Just a question, I think, from Johan Loiris from Equinor. Obviously, they're interested in gas and wind. He's saying, do you see H2, a sort of hydrogen, so blue hydrogen, so from natural gas, as an enabler for electrolysis, or as a hinder, or as a sort of a block? How do you view blue hydrogen, Marcus?
Well, we see a continuous progression for green hydrogen. We see it scaling up, and we see it expanding its contribution. We think it's up to largely national governments to decide what to do with blue hydrogen, how much they need, whether they can do CCS, whether they wish to do CCS. We see a need for a debate about this, a need for discussing green, discussing blue, making sure that we are considering apples with apples, as it were, not apples with pears. It's very conspicuous in the press the last 2 or 3 years. I've been in hydrogen a long time, but hydrogen is getting picked up the last couple of years as a buzzword and a new thing to chase. But there are issues of detail. What's the carbon footprint of the hydrogen? What's the purity of the hydrogen? What's the pressure of the hydrogen? Are you comparing like with like? What's the application for the hydrogen? In many cases, you need to grow the demand side as well as grow the supply side. So it's a gradual growth of the demand. It's not necessarily that the demand's already there. So I think in that context, there are some probably good solutions for green, good solutions for blue, but in the long run, the green hydrogen will be the one that is dominant, I think.
Right. Interesting, and always like to hear from you, Marcus. And I hope you'll stay online, because I think that once Marco is finished, we've had a few questions with him. We may come back for some more general questions. So I hope you can stay with us till 10:30.
Okay, no problem.
Good. Thanks very much for that. Our next speaker is Marco Weinecker from Wärtsilä, and I hope Marco is there.
I'm here.
Hi,
Good
Marco.
morning, everyone.
I hope you're also enjoying the discussion this morning. As I asked Marcus at the beginning of his presentation, I think we've had a very good one. I thought it was also very interesting to hear at the beginning from the MEP as well, who talked a lot about the need for things like low carbon industries in Europe. And I believe, Marco, you're taking a leading role in Wärtsilä, as you yourself currently the head of corporate relations sustainability in Wärtsilä. And I myself, as you know, have had the fortune to come and visit your new installations up in Vaasa, where you are indeed looking at building low carbon technology here in Europe with a large amount of investments and a large European workforce. And I suppose what everyone would like to know is a little bit about how Wärtsilä relates to the gas sector and the energy sector in general, and also how you see industrial strategy to support your continuing championship, if you like. We've heard from Marcus, who's coming from an up-and-coming thrusting part of the European industrial sectors. Wärtsilä's been around for a long time, so you're kind of a European champion anyway, but how should industrial strategy also help you maintain the leadership that you have? So I think you've got a few slides, which I hope we'll be able to show. Here we are.
Let's see how everything is working, but Kathleen, can you breathe? Okay, very good. I would like to start a little bit telling our background and where we are coming on this industrial strategy, and also what Wärtsilä is, how it can contribute for the climate action. And Wärtsilä has two business lines. One is the energy market and one is the marine market, and I think we are the leading solution provider in these segments. We are truly a global company. We have delivered our solutions more than 50,000 vessels, and concerning to the energy business, we have installed capacity of 72 gigawatts, actually in 180 countries. And we have heavily invested on R&D. I think that environmental performance and energy efficiency has been the key drivers in our R&D work for decades, and hopefully that has created a technological leadership and competitiveness, which is also needed in the future. Shall we go to the next slide, please? It's coming very slowly. Okay.
It's on my screen now. I hope you can see it too.
Yes. But if we look deeper these two segments that we involve with, we can see that there is a huge need for decarbonize. First, the marine segment, the International Maritime Organization has set the initial greenhouse gas strategy, which aims to lower the greenhouse gases from the vessels by 40% by 2030. And then later on, by 2050, the total shipping segment should reduce the absolute amount of the greenhouse gases by 50%. And this is, of course, a huge, let's say, goal for the whole industry, because this 50% reduction would mean, from vessel perspective, maybe 70 to 80% drop in the greenhouse gas emissions. And then we all know the EU Green Deal, we know the climate targets, we know the aim to be a carbon neutral by 2050. So both of these sectors are expected to do huge, let's say, improvement in terms of the emission reductions. And Wärtsilä, on the other hand, has identified its role, what the technology could do and how it could help and contribute in these climate actions. And in the marine side, we have created the Smart Marine Ecosystem vision, where we intend to make vessels more intelligent, connected to the ports, and through that to make the whole logistic chain more efficient, which of course then reduces the emissions as well. And in the long term, it also requires cleaner fuels, and I will explain that in a while. In energy side, we believe that 100% renewable energy is the future, and it can be happened. And there are technologies which enables this sort of development, and we truly believe that we can contribute for quite heavily on this sort of development to maximize the usage of renewable energy. Can we go to the next slide, please? I will start by the marine vision, that what would it require then as soon as the slide appears.
It's come up for us.
It's coming, right.
Yeah, you're probably just a little bit delayed between Brussels and Helsinki.
That is correct. There are many technologies. There is no silver bullet technology to solve the shipping challenge to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. But there are technologies already which can help to contribute the first target, which means 40% reduction. And that involves better utilization of the data, clean fuels, I would say LNG, biofuels whenever available, and other renewable energy, like solar and wind power assistant for the vessels. And that can take us to the 40% drop. But as said, that it's not enough to reaching the ultimate target, which is the 50% for the whole shipping segment. And there we would need more sustainable fuels, decarbonized fuels. Are they liquid or are they in a gaseous form? It doesn't matter, but these are needed, and it might involve power to X, synthetic gases, biogases, ammonia, whatever are the forms. But that will take us then to the level that which meets the IMO goal setting. And the good part is that the modern gas engine technology can utilize these biogases and synthetic gases already today. So it's a question that when they are available. But generally speaking, it's an extremely challenging exercise, because you have to involve all the known measures and put together to the vessels in order to reach these challenging targets for the shipping segments. Next slide, please.
It still hasn't changed here yet, don't worry about it. It's changed down at our end now, so it'll be with you in a minute.
Now it's coming, and this is some reflection of what Markus was saying already in the previous speech, that Wärtsilä has been quite active on modeling the power system. We have gained lots of expertise modeling the power systems, and I think that we have modeled more than 50 power systems in the world. We use modern tools to see that what sort of capacities there are needed in the system where the renewable share is increasing. And there is a clear learning that from these system modelings that actually you would need lots of flexibility. And modern engine power plants are flexible. And therefore we believe that the route going through the gas and then have decarbonized gas, are they biogases or synthetic gases, is the better one than just get rid of every let's say gaseous fuels from the energy production. And you can see here a study that we made in Germany calculating the different paths to the 100% future. The lower part is explaining to the future that only solar and batteries are involved, and then the upper part is including more, let's say, diverse capacity mixes, including also thermal capacities, which first starts gas, natural gas, and then it switches to the power to X technology and clean gases in the future. And both of these reaches the 100% renewable future, but the cost levels are totally different. And therefore, it's extremely important that also in the industrial strategies that we take this into account that the thermal capacity is needed, flexible capacity can reduce the any challenge related to reliability. It can be sustainable and it can be cost-efficient way to go forward.
Marco, can I ask you just a little question on the point we have $64 for a megawatt hour scenario? The engines, solar, wind and storage, I think it's clear. The engines, what is the fuel you're using?
In this 64, I think that it's a natural gas.
Natural gas, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, but you can see that the current system with only thermal is even higher cost level. That so when the technologies are going further, it doesn't necessarily mean that that the whole system is getting, let's say, more costs, which is then buried to the consumers. But of course, the capacity factors of the flexible generation are much lower than they are currently. So we can talk about in the end game maybe 4-5% of capacity factors, but these are crucial capacities. So to say that then you can reduce the battery size and make the system more cost efficient.
Yeah, no, I think I'm sorry for interrupting your presentation. It just immediately spoke to me. I just wanted to check exactly what fuel you're running the engines on that one, but please continue.
Yeah, and can we have the next slide, please? So Wärtsilä heavily, of course, believes that our technology can contribute in the climate action, and it's a European technology, and therefore, in order to keep the technological leadership and also being more competitive, Wärtsilä has decided to build very new production facility in Finland. I think that the investment is totally around 200 million about, and we will create a very modern production facilities, but at the same time it will be a partner campus where, let's say, the suppliers, universities, different stakeholders can be in the same premises, and we hope that this sort of collaboration is a strong indication that we will keep the technological leadership also in the future. We would definitely need that in order to survive in the hard competition. And then I hope that this is also acknowledged European-wide, that we need to secure that certain technologies which can enable the renewable future and 100% renewable future stays alive in Europe.
Thank you for that, Marco. Really interesting presentation, and really fascinating to see what you are planning and doing in Wärtsilä. As you know, we have a very good and close relationship, so you are a technology provider for the gas sector today. I mean, the innovation center, which is under construction, I mean, this represents hundreds of millions of euros investments and thousands of European jobs, if I remember well from the time that I was.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
And I think these are the sort of things that you know, in a way, the industrial strategy needs to grow. You said yourself, you know, you've got intelligent ships, intelligent ports, cleaner fuels. These are the things that we can all develop in Europe. And if you think about the industrial strategy, is there anything specific that you in Wärtsilä would see as necessary to maintain your champion status, your leadership?
At least I think that it's the safeguarding, let's say, the technology neutral future for decarbonized world, because if there is a certain restriction and therefore the technologies cannot compete, I think that as I saw that there were two different routes or paths for the future, and recognizing the ones which are most cost efficient can be providing reliability to the power sector and also the shipping sector, they are definitely need to be recognized. And of course, I think that the decarbonized gas and cleaner fuels are needed. So all sort of efforts which then provides support for the development is welcomed.
Right. I think there are some questions. You talked about your shipping interest, the shipping segment. People are saying, you know, what do you think about changes in relation to gas engine tankers and bigger ships? Will there be more Will there be less? How do you see the market evolving for engines in ships? And I mean, that'd be primarily LNG. How do you see it? How's the market developing, Marco?
Of course, concerning the number of vessels, I don't have the wisdom how the future would look like after this pandemic, but IMO has prepared scenarios for the future, and based on these scenarios, I think that the shipping sector is expected to grow quite heavily. And that also explains, let's say, the burden that the shipping sector needs to take into account when there is this 50% reduction of greenhouse gases. Because if the number of vessels is doubling or tripling, that would mean that with one single vessel, there is even more required to reduce the emissions. So definitely, there will be more vessels at some point, but the pandemic is of course creating new challenges, and it's hard to see now that when would it happen and how it would happen. But at least for the projections that there are currently is indicating that the numbers of vessels are increasing. And what comes to the role of the LNG, I think that LNG has lots of benefits concerning the heavy fuel oil and the other fuels which has been used. We have to remember that there are also other so-called traditional emissions that which is caused by the particles sulfur and the nitrogen oxides, and in that respect LNG is clean. There was some indication already what Markus said, that there are certain concerns concerning to the LNG emissions, and I would say that we have technologies which are better than compared to the liquid fuels, HFO, LFO, in the performance of the greenhouse gases, and in the future there are even more, let's say, better technologies. So it's a step forward, and I think that shipping needs to take that. But of course, it will be supplemented with other fuel streams, and when they are available, they can be local or they can be regional. But on a global scale, we need to have a fuel which can be delivered in the main ports, and LNG could be the one at this point.
And just as an evolution on that question, I mean, I think many people see the role of LNG in shipping and shipping fuels because of the, you know, they call it the hard to decarbonize sector. But I think that, you know, you are a technology provider that can certainly lead the push on that. But Mikhail Tarka asked, do you see a role for biomethane in the transport sector? So we'll interpret that into shipping, so sort of bioenergy. Do you in Wärtsilä envisage that as part of your 100% renewable future? Do you see there being sufficient supply and utilization for biomethane in transport?
That's a good question, and of course it's difficult us to say that would there be enough. I think that we are ready to utilize if there are the gas, and our customers are ready to utilize that. When we talk about methane, is it a fossil methane or biomethane or even the synthetic methane? It's still methane. So in that sense, it's easy to utilize in the engine technology. And of course, having the route with fossils, bio, and maybe syngases, then the infrastructure is more or less the same, and it's easy to switch and increase the share of maybe bio or synthetic gases, and then you can reduce the greenhouse gases with the same percentage when that's available. So yes, in a sense, but who is going to use that first, and what is the availability? I think that the gas industry needs to respond to that.
Well, I think that what I'll say to you on that one, Marco, is that indeed Eurogas is working with DNVGL on a pathway study to 2050, where we will look at availabilities of things like biomethane stocks in line with RED II sustainability criteria. So this will help us, I hope, answer that question to some extent, but it's always interesting to see how you also see it as a producer of engines which can also run on biomethane. As you say, methane. So from that point of view, it is interesting for us to see that. I think if Marcus is still there, I would like to bring him back as well and ask a general question to you both. Is Marcus still there? Yes, Marcus is still there. Anna Gumbau asked this question. She asked, do you think the EU industrial strategy should now be amended again, because it was actually originally drafted before we had the COVID crisis, stating that some people see that the strategy is outdated? I mean, maybe Marcus, will start with you, because even within the strategy, even though it was pre-COVID, it already included things like the Clean Hydrogen Alliance in it. Do you think there's a need to review the strategy?
I must admit that thought was in my mind when I read it. I thought it very much read as a pre-COVID strategy. I think we're learning some lessons because of this COVID crisis, and the way we come out of it in an energy system sense, and the demand we place can be connected or coupled to our desire for this long-term energy transition, and that the policymakers can use this, if you will, exit strategy from the COVID crisis to be the commencement strategy for the decarbonisation or cleaning up the air crisis that we have before us. And I think it's important to try and harness that. So yeah, I would certainly agree and support, you know, a reconsideration of some of the emphasis. I think there's some truisms in there, some very, very good succinct sentences which are very encouraging. It suggests to me the officials have understood certain things very well, and I think it says many good things. But yeah, I think reconsideration of it would be wise, as you know, and re-editing of it. Yeah.
And Marco?
I also agree that this pandemic has changed a lot, and I think that what we need to have is a clear strategy further to what is needed, and maybe this is also an opportunity for certain developments, a little bit making it more faster, but it should be based on the proper assessment that what is the pathway where we can commit to, and therefore it's time to take everything into account, and definitely I agree with what the others were saying as well.
Yeah, I think then I would take from that, I think it's probably fair to say that there's a certain degree of urgency that has developed in light of the COVID pandemic and its impact on us. That was probably not able to be captured, though the overall sentiment is probably a good one. It now needs to be refined in light of what we think we need in the policy sector going forward. I mean, just on the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, though, Marcus, I suppose there's still room to shape that somehow, because it wasn't supposed to launch until August or so. So I presume that on the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, that's something that should go forward and can still be built in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just say that in the basis that yesterday Eurogas and 12 other associations sent a letter which basically said that to ministers, to commissioners, and so on and so forth, that, you know, there needs to be a stronger focus on what we want to do to come out of the COVID-19 era.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the big opportunities for the gas grid is to stand up and say, look, we'll move to admixtures now of 20% or whatever, and invite that solution to be applied. I think we need different sectors to almost invite and encourage this thing through to strengthen the routes forward. So that opportunity is there. And I think there's always that balance for the policymakers between, do you penalise the consumers or do you penalise the suppliers, and how do you get that tax regime, etc., working? But it needs that development now to make it real, rather than just be concepts or demonstration projects.
Well, I think we'll just have one more question. The time is running out. It's 10:26 on my clock. But one of the important things that if we just wanted to bridge the clean hydrogen strategy, and since we have also an engine manufacturer, there was a question put forward from Roman, who was saying, does anyone have experience about how hydrogen can go into methane gas pipes? Now, Marcus, do you see that there is an issue with hydrogen being carried by pipes? And Marco, for you, are you looking at your engines in terms of compatibility for blending of hydrogen? Are you starting to do research and development into hydrogen engines? So maybe Marco, I'll start with you this time, just to say, we have a question in general. I think it comes across not just today, but people ask about how suitable are the technologies we have currently running on methane to adapt to hydrogen. So maybe Marco, I'll go to you, and then Marcus, I'll come back to you as well. And if you have any other final points that you'd like to make, please do so in this intervention.
Okay, if I start, we have investigated the use of hydrogen as a blend, and I think that we can utilize already today maybe 25-30% of hydrogen in the engines, depending, of course, of the engine type, and further investigations are probably made to see if there could be a total 100 or whatever percentage in the utilization rate. But of course, understanding that the engine technology has been designed for utilizing different fuels, so maybe then the hydrogen would require a different approach. But definitely, it's an interesting point, and we are doing our share to make it usable in the future.
No, thank you, Marco. And I think that is one of the challenges, I think, for technology producers as well, also to look at, you know, what kind of future we will have in terms of gaseous fuels. Marcus, I know you are looking more at the pipes as well. I mean, what's your view and your experience of, you know, hydrogen being carried in the current gas grid?
I think when you know the downstream users are mainly boilers and cooking equipment, as applies in the residential sector, then there's no problem at all with injecting low concentration hydrogen. There are papers which go up to, I think, 34%. There are a couple of projects underway at 20% trials in the UK and France. And it's been talked about for many years going to lower percentages than that. Obviously, as you move up, the gas becomes different to combust. Its energy content becomes different. But I certainly don't see, from what I've read, a problem at 20%. So putting powder gas into distribution networks is relatively straightforward and could be done now. I think the problems come when you want to distribute it, or rather transmit it long distance to some large-scale end users, such as gas turbines, effects on compressors, effects of embrittlement in pipelines, etc. Some of that is not clear, and therefore we would probably advocate a bottom-up approach initially to this decarbonisation, and it's a function of your pipeline network and what you're able to transmit. But clearly, methane's a pretty clean fuel. The only one after methane is hydrogen, so it's kind of an obvious step. You have to get there one way or the other. Fortuitously, pipelines are a lot cheaper than electricity cables. So it's kind of, if it's not compatible, then changing it is not that difficult, guys. You know, it can be done. Who pays is maybe the question.
Well, I think in the end, everyone knows the answer to who pays, Marcus, for everything that happens in terms of transitions. But yeah, the question is always how much we pay, I think. And I think what Marco was showing earlier is a sort of mixed vectoral approach to reaching our climate targets. And, you know, in their case, in Vaasa, they talk about 100% renewable future. In our Eurogas, we talk about reaching carbon climate neutrality. So I think that in the end, it's really how you actually achieve those objectives, but doing the most cost-effective way, so that the taxpayer or the consumer, whichever way you want to look at it, doesn't have to pick up the biggest bill. We've come to the end of the broadcast this morning. I want to say thank you very much to Marcus and Marco. It was really good to have MEP Grudler on as well to get the views of the European Parliament. I think you've all contributed very, very nicely to the discussion on what industrial strategy should mean for climate leadership in the EU. I was sorry that we couldn't have Mark Nicholas this morning because of technical issues, though I understand everybody also understands the nature of the world that we live in, and we are sometimes, I think we'll have to pick up what was being said by Mr. Grudler about needing a better digital Europe, and maybe what Marco is saying about more intelligent ships and ports and intelligent internet systems to make sure we don't have technical problems in the future. But I also want to say we had over 170 participants today. We've had huge amounts of questions, and I apologize to everybody whose questions I couldn't pull. There were a lot, I couldn't see them all, but I really did feel it was very, very good level of engagement and interaction. So thank you, Marco, thank you, Marcus, thanks to the MEP, and thank you most of all to the participants for coming, giving questions. And I hope you found what we discussed today interesting. There will be another webinar from Eurogas in a couple of weeks, which we will announce shortly, and who the speakers will be. We hope you'll join us again for another Let's Meet. And until then, stay well, keep healthy, and keep enjoying ourselves as best we can with these kind of webinars. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.